It's always important to hear what the other side has to say because you never want to live inside of an echo chamber. Listen to this shocking interview with a pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian British citizen as she's interviewed here by British journalist Julia Hartley-Brewer in an interview that was inspired by the flotilla to Gaza with Greta Thunberg. Here goes.
Right now, though, let's talk about this. Greta Thunberg on the so-called Freedom Flotilla to Gaza, getting intercepted by the Israeli forces. They said they'd intercept them, and they did. She recorded a video just before this, and this is what she had to say.
My name is Greta Thunberg and I am from Sweden. If you see this video, we have been intercepted and kidnapped in international waters by the Israeli occupational forces or forces that support Israel. I urge all my friends, family and comrades to put pressure on the Swedish government to release me and the others as soon as possible.
Kidnapped, she claims, needs to be released. Well, she will be released. She'll be flown home. I'm not sure whether the Swedes want her back or not, but let's talk about this with journalist Yvonne Ridley, who joins us once again. Good afternoon to you, Yvonne.
Afternoon, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. What do you make of Greta Thunberg using the term kidnapped when she was taken by Israeli forces, who gave them sandwiches and bottles of water, taken to shore, and will now be shown the video of what happened on October the 7th and then sent home? That's not a kidnapping, is it, when people are actually still, dozens of them, still kept in tunnels by Hamas who were kidnapped on the October the 7th? Should she have used that term?
Well, she was kidnapped. She was in international waters on board a humanitarian aid vessel heading towards Gaza. And according to the UN laws and regulations, anyone carrying humanitarian aid into a war zone should be allowed in unimpeded. As I say, this was in international waters, and the law is quite clear. If they'd been in Israeli territorial waters, or that would have been a different matter. But it was a British registered ship, which should have been allowed safe passage to deliver the aid that it had on board.
OK, a number of things. I think actually it's not quite so clear-cut as you say. Countries are entitled to instigate blockades when there is a war zone. Gaza is quite clearly a war zone. You say it was an aid vessel. It was a bunch of people who were doing selfies for Instagram. There was probably less aid on that boat. It's a tiny little vessel. Probably less aid on that boat than, frankly, the stuff that most of us have got in our own kitchen cabinets right now in terms of the aid they were actually going to bring. Even they admitted it was, it was sort of it was sort of making a gesture.
It was symbolic.
It was symbolic. So it wasn't aid, was it? So either, OK, was it an aid vessel? Or was it a symbolic aid vessel? Which is because one of them would actually help people and one doesn't. So it wasn't an aid vessel. So we both agreed that, right?
People starving in Gaza. Starving, according to the medical experts.
According to the medical experts, who aren't allowed to say anything unless they say what Hamas has told them.
Because journalists are not being allowed into Gaza.
Why are journalists not allowed into Gaza?
Well, you tell me. Israel is obviously trying to hide some of the war crimes that it has been investigated for.
Well, they're not doing it very well, are they? Because we're constantly being shown evidence, we're told, of war crimes by Israel. So they're not hiding it very well.
Well, no, they're not. We've had IDF soldiers being arrested in various parts of the world who've been recognised as committing war crimes. You talk about the selfie yacht. Well, what about the selfie IDF filming themselves in women's underwear, women that they've probably killed?
Probably. I mean, probably. There's no doubt at all in war there are people on all sides, and we've in the British Army who have done wrong, and actually it's the other fellow soldiers who are the most appalled by those crimes, and people get arrested and prosecuted, and quite rightly. However, let's come back to our selfie yacht. I think there's a very good reason why Israel doesn't want Western journalists into Gaza because A, they can't protect them, and B, there is a very big issue, we already see it, with Hamas controlling people. We know this has already happened in Lebanon, where we have got where American, or not American, where Western, where Yvonne, where Western journalists go in, and they know, and this happens to Palestinian so-called journalists in Gaza, if you say stuff we don't want you to say, you and your family are at risk of reprisals. And we know those reprisals are very real from a murderous terrorist group. We would not get honest reporting. People wouldn't be safe, and it wouldn't be honest reporting.
Hundreds of senior journalists of the quality of Jeremy Bowen have said...
Oh, well, the quality of Jeremy Bowen.
You know, it's... what right does Israel have to dictate to newspapers who they should and should not let into the war zone? Journalists take risks every day, and there are some really... senior veteran journalists who are prepared to take those risks and go in.
They are, and on balance, I would see those journalists. On balance, I would. Again, you went into Afghanistan. You were kidnapped there. I have to say, I'm not entirely sure. Given that apparently the BBC and Sky and everyone else are able to get all of their information from Palestinian journalists on the ground in Gaza, I'm not quite sure why you think the truth isn't getting out, because we're told every single day of apparently yet another atrocity committed by Israel. So I don't know why you think that we're not getting the real news about what's coming out of Gaza, because every report I see fulfills your narrative beautifully.
Well, the truth is getting out, but
so
at
what's
the same time, there is no substitute for having your own person on the ground reporting with that byline from Joe Blogs in Gaza. Yep. And every journalist in Fleet Street would say to you, there is no substitute for having your own person on the ground, your own eyes and ears. I've worked with the journalists in Gaza before. I've met many of them. And yes, I have.
I bet you have, Yvonne, given your views. Yes, I'm sure you were very welcome there as one of the, and I mean this in the most loving way, one of the useful pro-Palestinian useful idiots, yes, who will spout any anti-Israeli pro-Hamas nonsense that you're encouraged to do.
Well, you would say that.
Yeah, because I do facts.
I have met the journalists and the men and the women who've bravely reported. 220 are now dead.
220 people who put on a press vest. Targeting of journalists is a war crime, absolutely. However, an awful lot of the people, like those journalists in the press outfits who were filming the release of Hamas hostages, along with the International Red Cross, who were getting the girls to pose, look happy for the cameras as we release you back to your family members after raping and starving you in the tunnels for months on end. Those journalists, or are those ones okay?
Look, I didn't see that.
Oh, you didn't see it? That's weird, because it was on all over social media. It was played on national news, I recall. Those journalists were there. They were completely safe there. Were those journalists filming what Hamas wanted them to film? Were they journalists? Would you have done that?
I would say that they're probably the same as the Western journalists during the liberation of Kabul, who were paying people $50 a time to shave off their beards for the camera. Unfortunately, there are people in our profession who sell their principles down the path.
Yes, there are, aren't there? Let's talk about selling out our principles, Yvonne Ridley, because when I knew you and worked with you at the Sunday Express many years ago, I believed you to be someone of integrity and someone who cared about facts. You did an interview yesterday in which you talked about how October the 7th had been overhyped. Your word, overhyped. What did you mean by that?
40 beheaded babies is a bit of an exaggeration.
No, that's a massive lie. There weren't 40 beheaded. No. When I talk about October the 7th, when Israel talks about October the 7th, when any official, when any journalist who knows anything about it talks about October the 7th, they never mention there being 40 beheaded babies, because it was a confusion from one journalist on one day that went around the world, which has been totally debunked. So
it wasn't just one journalist.
It was one journalist who said it. It was one journalist who said it, and she had misunderstood what she had been told by an IDF soldier.
And they were all the first responders from the Zaka charity who invented stories about what they saw.
Did they?
I've read, I'm going to pronounce this all wrong, Yedioth Ahronoth, the Israeli newspaper, Haaretz, and the Israeli Times, who have all reported on October the 7th because they stopped and said there's too much contradiction coming here. And so they looked at the narrative, and it was over-exaggerated.
It was what was exaggerated? Wait a second, I want to clarify. Were 1,200 people killed that day?
Yes, there were.
Okay, no. Were women murdered and raped and mutilated before they were murdered on that day?
I don't know if they were raped.
You don't know if they were raped?
No, I don't.
You don't know, even though Hamas fighters themselves have actually filmed the rapes. They've been found on their own body cams and put on social media.
I have.
But you don't know.
Body cams, but I do remember a family saying our daughter has not been raped. She was murdered, and they were very, very upset.
Oh, so one family's daughter wasn't raped. Brilliant. Were children killed deliberately on October the 7th?
There were teenage twins who were killed. There was one baby that was killed.
One baby.
One baby.
That's all the children. You got three. Okay. Was anyone mutilated? Was anyone mutilated? Were bodies mutilated, and were families burnt alive on October the 7th?
I did see raped and mutilated bodies, but I
thought they weren't raped. I thought no one was raped. You told me a minute ago they weren't raped.
Well, hold on. These were of Iranian Kurdish fighters, and what on earth their photographs were doing mixed in with the October 7th photographs.
Okay, when were 251 people taken hostage by Hamas and others from Gaza and taken into Gaza and taken as hostages? They were. Okay. And when some of those women, some alive, some dead, with mutilated, naked, blood-strewn bodies, when they were paraded through the streets, did a load of Palestinian civilians cheer and spit and beat those bodies? Did you see any of those videos? Did that happen, or was that overhyped?
Yes, that happened.
That happened. Okay, and when the hostages who've been released were released, were any of those, in their experiences in that time, were they starved, tortured, beaten, and in some cases sexually abused and raped? Did that happen?
If you say it does,
it's not me. I wasn't there. I'm not saying it happened. The people who it happened to said it happened. Do you believe them? Do you believe those hostages, or are they lying?
I'm still looking into, but October the 7th does not give an exemption pass for Israel.
Didn't ask that. You said October the 7th was overhyped. How do you overhype a massacre involving 1,200 people, rape and mutilation and hostage taking? How do you overhype that?
I just said before, the 40...
No, that's debunked. That's long debunked. Over a year ago, and you're still going on about it. I'm not talking about the stuff that didn't happen. I'm talking about the stuff that did happen. Was it over? How is that overhyped?
About that, the President of the United States, the last one, still hasn't apologised.
And he should, because it was untrue. It was untrue. But this is why facts matter. Yvonne, we're going to have to leave it here. But I mean, just want to say, you were supposed to be on that freedom flotilla. Why didn't you go?
I was supposed to be on the Conscience, which was blown up in Malta by Israel. Of course,
I don't know the details on that. Okay, but would you go on the next one?
Country.
Would you go on the next one, and would you like to would you like to go to Gaza?
Go on the next one.
Do you think you'd be welcomed there?
On the next one.
Do you think you'd be welcome there?
In Gaza, absolutely. Yes, I'd be welcome.
Oh, I'm sure they'd love you.
Israelis, obviously.
All right. Yvonne Ridley, you probably got a better chance of surviving if you're in Israel than Gaza. Yvonne, I so appreciate you joining us. I am, as always, utterly appalled by your views on this, but I'd rather hear them. I'd rather have people hear them so we can challenge them.
There's just no words to describe what we just heard. You know, normally I like to comment on what people have to say, but here it is just utter stupidity. And the interviewer, Julia Hartley Brewer, really could not have said it better than when she said, Yvonne, you are just a useful idiot, and there is absolutely no other way to explain this. I mean, why would you stand to defend the people that would kill you in a heartbeat given the chance? I don't really understand why Israel stopped the flotilla. Why don't they let them into Gaza and see what would have happened to them? If Yvonne would have gone into Gaza, I can't imagine it having been peaches and cream, rainbows and sunshine. But we have to remember one thing, that the sixth of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not murder. And the ninth of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not lie. You're not allowed to bear false witness. And that is what we just saw. When people lie in order to defend murder, rape, mutilation, beheading, torture, and everything else that happened on October 7th, when they're not sure, when they're still looking into it, when they're not sure what's going on, no mention, of course, of the hostages. Israel's doing this only some sort of as a punitive retaliation for October 7th. No mention for the fact that we still have men, women, and children, men and women really now, that are languishing in Israel, in Gaza dungeons under Hamas. There's just no words to describe this degree of stupidity, of insanity, and it's so critical for us to remember who it is that we're arguing against. Keep a level head. Don't get emotional. Remember that truth banishes falsehood like the light banishes the darkness. They cannot stand in our presence.